Gekko is about to be one of the most played and probably most confusing agents to play against in Valorant. There's a good chance that he's going to feel extremely broken on release, so buckle up because here are a bunch of tips you absolutely need to know to play with or against Gekko. Let's start with Gekko's signature ability, Dizzy. This floating blue armadillo introduces what seems to be a new projectile type to the game. When thrown, Dizzy flies up, activates after about half of a second, then slowly floats downwards while scanning for line of sight enemies to zap with a blinding goo. Dizzy can bounce off of walls and change directions while active and provides a unique mix of recon and initiation since the blinding goo he shoots leaves tracers which can alert you to enemy locations. Dizzy can be destroyed while flying to cancel the ability, which makes combining it with another flash much stronger and more likely to be effective. Lots of pro teams throw a flash to cover utility like Sova's recon dart or Fade's haunt to make sure it doesn't get immediately broken, and this strategy should work super well with Gekko's creature-based utility. Moving on to Mosh Pit, Gekko has his own unique style of molly to deny a choke point or clear a cubby on sight. Despite looking like a huge Viper molly, Mosh doesn't do damage over time and has a single damage instance that activates after about 3 seconds, making it pretty bad for stalling. However, if an enemy is caught in the middle of Mosh's area when it explodes, it will do 150 damage, making it pretty effective at cutting an attacking team in half. Mosh is definitely strongest when comboed with Fade's Seize or Astra's Gravity Well to hold enemies in place for instant kills. However, its most likely use case will be to clear cubbies on a bomb site, forcing someone to swing out or die. Wingman is by far the most hyped of Gekko's abilities, and with good reason. Using the same deployment system as Raze's Boombot, Wingman runs forward, bounces off of walls, and looks for enemies to lock onto, just like the Boombot. However, instead of charging and exploding for damage, Wingman concusses in a cone-shaped area when it locks onto somebody. This is a great info tool, but Wingman's alternate fire is what the hype is really all about. An attacking Gekko who is holding the spike can alt fire Wingman at a plant site and release the little Pokemon to run with the spike, which it then plants upon hitting the site. Yeah, I really just said those words. Now, this does have drawbacks because Wingman can be shot and destroyed, which will immediately drop the spike at Wingman's current location and potentially deep behind enemy lines. This is easily going to be the biggest way for people to troll their team and throw rounds for months to come. On the defensive side of things, Wingman can also be thrown at a planted spike to defuse the spike as well. According to the guy at Riot who designed Gekko, this mechanic of defusing or planting the spike will continue even if the Gekko who threw the Wingman dies.
Wingman is planting or defusing and Gekko dies. Wingman keeps going.
Unless you're the last agent alive. That probably sounds overpowered, but let's talk about why this is actually going to make Gekko ridiculously broken. Anytime you try to plant or defuse the spike, you are effectively removing yourself from the map for the entire animation of that action. With Wingman, you can now plant the spike and keep your gun out, adding an extra gun or even extra utility to the defense of the planter or the diffuser. This breaks a fundamental paradigm of Valorant, allowing you to effectively add a player to your team while you're trying to plant or defuse. And we've seen how changing fundamental parts of the game can drastically affect the overall experience. For example, when we introduced weaponized utility to the game, it broke the economy, and how being untradeable on an agent definitely breaks the operator and the overall agent balance as well. So I'm a little bit worried about this part of Gekko's kit. Now, obviously, you have to have Wingman available to use it to plant the spike, which might mean that you can't use it as a boombot for reconnaissance. This seems like a great time to talk about Gekko's other unique and very broken mechanic. All of Gekko's creature-based utility, that means Dizzy, that means Wingman, and that means his ultimate, can be picked up to be used again. Essentially, Gekko's utility drops a little orb after it has been expended or destroyed that can be reclaimed exactly like an ultimate orb, putting it back in his inventory to use later after a short cooldown. This means that you can, in fact, actually use Wingman to clear an early angle, reclaim it, and then also use it to plant the spike later in the round. Pretty wild stuff. It is important to note, though, that the orbs will time out after 20 seconds if they are not reclaimed by Gekko. Like other thrown utility, you also have to rebuy it in the next round, but being able to use a second boombot or a second or third or even fourth or even more flashes does seem incredibly strong. Also, how about a second ultimate? Speaking of Gekko's ultimate, Thrash functions essentially like a stim-beaconed Sky Dog. Instead of a concussion effect on exploding, however, Thrash detains players in an area of effect around the explosion for 5 seconds. Yep, just like Killjoy's ultimate, so make sure that somebody is following Thrash to farm those free kills. Thrash can also be picked up, but only once per round, unlike Dizzy and Wingman. Let's quickly talk about overall gameplay on Gekko. We know all info agents are incredibly strong, and I can definitely see Gekko taking over, or at least supplementing, all of the current info initiators. Like Sky, Gekko's pop flashing through smokes should be incredibly strong, as it lets you hide the windup of the flash and avoid having it being destroyed. Another comparison I like to draw is with Raze or Sky, which have throwable utility that you can kind of bait, where you let the utility take contact around a corner and you can trade off of it, like a Seeker or a Boombot. There's definitely some interesting play patterns and tempo here, because being able to take an early fight with utility, reclaim that utility, and then take more fights with it later on should encourage a lot of sort of like stop and start fighting for map control. For instance, you take A main on Ascent, you stop, you pick up the utility that you used, and then a little bit later, you fight for the site with new cooldowns on that same utility. This is also going to make it much harder to keep track of what utility has been used in a round, since the cooldown time on many of Gekko's abilities can be a range instead of just one specific use case. From his creative and zoomer aesthetic to the chaotic and clever gameplay patterns, there are so many things to like about Valorant's 20-second agent. However, I'm definitely a little worried about how much some of what Gekko can do might break core parts of Valorant's mechanics. So hopefully this video has prepared you a little bit, and let me know what you think in the comments below.